Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you. A little bit about myself. I have a general interest in history and heritage. I'm not an expert in any facet of it at all. I know a little bit about a lot, but I don't know a lot about anything. My interest is very wide-ranging. I also own and run a railway, which is 1.5 miles long. And 2 years ago, I built a full-scale set of World War I trenches at Park Hall, countryside near Oswestry, to be a part of the commemoration of the centenary of the Great War. So I get involved in all sorts of weird and wonderful projects. But those are projects that I got involved in knowingly. What I'm going to talk to you about today is something that I got involved in unknowingly, and it really overtook everything. The museum that I set up in Oswestry has its 5th anniversary on the 1st of March, and we expect to see our 25,000th visitor sometime in the next 2 weeks. So we haven't done bad for a small volunteer-led museum, which is not core funded. The Oswestry Town Council support us very, very well. They give us the top floor of the building, they pay our heat and light, and we have one condition that's put on us: we have to continually prove that we're an asset to Oswestry. So we try probably a little bit harder. When we set up the museum, we wanted to do it not like a conventional museum where you just fill cabinets with items. We wanted to tell the story of Oswestry through its people. And when we say its people, we mean anybody that was associated with Oswestry. So we tend to delve into the history of anybody that has any relationship with Oswestry at all. One example is William Wallace's great-great-great-great-grandfather came from Oswestry. So if Scotland had declared for independence, we were going to immediately claim Scotland for Oswestry. So in order to do this, I set up a wide-ranging search on eBay and every other auction site for anything to do with Oswestry. And this is where the letters came from. Because I noticed 3 letters, a pack of 3 letters that were for sale on eBay, and the reason they were of interest to us is because they were addressed to a serviceman doing his forerunner of national service, but his basic training at Park Hall Camp in Oswestry. So I bought them, purely to put on display to demonstrate that people from all over Great Britain came to Oswestry to do their basic training. And these letters were addressed to a gunner, Gilbert Bradley. And we bought them, put them on display in the museum with a small plaque saying that it demonstrated people came to Park Hall Camp. The next week, the man that I bought them off put another 3 up for sale. So I bought those as well. And we thought we'd got it pegged. We thought that was it. So what we did was we took the 6 letters. The first 3, by the way, coincidentally, were one to him from his mother, one from his father, and one that was signed Your Ever-Loving G. And the one that was signed Your Ever-Loving G talked about what would happen after the war when they set up home together. So we presumed that it was from his fiancée or his girlfriend. Other sort of connotations didn't cross our mind at all. And we actually transcribed the first 6 letters, and this is the folder that we put them out in. Please don't remove, museum copy. This folder contains copies of the original letters. We photocopied the envelope, we photocopied the letters, and then we transcribed them because some of the writing is difficult to see. The letters show that Gunner Bradley trained with a number of different units during his time at Park Hall. Some letters are from his dad, others appear to be from his girlfriend or fiancée. Wonderful comments from a bygone age. And we thought that was it. We thought, that's it, we've got a wonderful display. We put this out on display, we put the 6 letters at the back. And the next week he put another 3 letters up for sale. And over the next 18 months, I bought almost 1,000 letters. Over the next 18 months at some considerable cost. 2 of my daughters are in the room, so I can't say too much because they'll tell Mum. She sends them along and she says, "What did Dad say about eBay? What did he say about what he's bought on eBay?" But it was in the thousands. I got into a bidding war with an academic from Dundee University over some of the letters because they refer to when Gilbert was in Scotland. And I am, when you get to know me, I am bloody-minded, pig-headed, obstinate, whatever you want to call it, and there was no way he was going to outbid me. And in the end, we were paying between £70 and £80 for each letter. But we got the collection, and you've got to remember that at that time, I was only buying letters because they had the word Oswestry on them. And occasionally in the pack came other letters. The letters that we got first were quite interesting, because one of the first ones that we got, and I'll give you an example that we thought was from his fiancée, it says, "It starts, my own darling." And it says, "You poor darling, I know how horrible it is for you, and I wish I had the power to get you out of it all. It's the knowledge I can do nothing that makes me so frantic. I am relieved that you have at least got a bed, and you are lucky to have a warm place to sleep. I certainly didn't expect you would be supplied with sheets." And those are the tone of the letters that made us assume that they were from somebody that obviously cared about his welfare. And in the same letter, "I feel that all our happiness and all our unhappiness should be shared," because it's explained that he is not very happy about being in the army. "And I feel even if I couldn't be with you, I should at least be in the army somewhere, so that we were leading the same sort of life." Well, of course, that was a clue, which we didn't pick up on in the early days. "On the other hand, I feel if I'm trying to get home together and some kind of business started, then you could come home to when you're out of the army. I should perhaps be helping you more than if I were in the army, and giving you something to look forward to, which may help you." So there's an awful lot of caring in just in that one letter. The interesting thing for us to do with Oswestry was that they talked about meeting up in Oswestry. And the letter says, "When I come up to see you, I'll have to get you to take a room for me at some pub in Oswestry. If you have time, of course, and I come up at any weekend when you have 2 nights off and you're not going home, we would stay in Shrewsbury, anywhere less God-forsaken than Oswestry." We didn't emphasise that one when we put the letters on display. And then on the next page he says, "When I stay in Oswestry, I must find a very cheap pub." Well, I don't mean cooking sherry, but you know, cheap. And he ends the letter, as we know it now, he ends the letter, we thought she ended the letter, "I love you so utterly, darling, G." And that was really one of the first 3 letters that we bought. So we transcribed the letters, we put them out on display, and when we bought the other letters, they weren't really important, if you know what I mean. We bought the first 6, we'd put them on display. I was just buying the others because they were to do with the same guy and they were to do with Oswestry. It's only later we started getting other letters. We bought more letters, they weren't in any date order. I think this was the interesting thing. If they'd have been in date order, we may have only bought the ones that were of interest to us because he was doing his basic training at Parkhill Camp. But because they weren't in any date order, we bought them all. We had letters from his mum and from his dad. The confusing thing was that he's got 2 sisters and a brother, or had 2 sisters and a brother. None of them used their own name. Gilbert was known by most members in his family as Tim. Brenda was known as Buddy. His sister Mary was known as Goo. And his brother James was known as Hamish or Jay. And we had other letters from friends, and 1 or 2 from his landlady and some from an aunt. The story of Gilbert that came out when we bought these letters, which really got us fascinating. We got some letters from when he was at school. Gilbert was educated at Oundle School. So his parents were quite well to do. One of his early mentors was a chap by the name of Brigadier General R.G. Burton, who was one of the last British Indian Raj army officers, and wrote books called The Tiger Hunters. And he used to take Gilbert all over the country. This is in the 1930s in his motor car. And they would go on outings and they would go on trips together. We've got one of the itineraries. Gilbert kept one of the itineraries, and it's a visit to Whipsnade Zoo. And it reads like a military exercise. It says, "Gilbert, this is the itinerary for our trip to Whipsnade Zoo. At 9:05 we will see the penguins. At 9:10 we will go see the elephants. At 9:15, and it is exactly like a military exercise, but Brigadier General R.G. Burton seems to have been a very colourful character, and I've read a couple of the books that he wrote. So whether this was where Gilbert became introduced to LGBT people, I don't know, because I don't know whether Brigadier General R.G. Burton was. That's what we've got to look at. But he certainly spent an awful lot of time with him. Gilbert was a BBC junior studio assistant at one time. Gilbert also worked for Cadbury's, and when he was with Cadbury's, he made a promotional film. Cadbury's made a promotional film which Gilbert took part in, about how difficult it was to get cocoa beans during the era of the war. And Cadbury's very kindly have sent us a copy of the film. I haven't brought that along. We've got it on a computer. I haven't managed to process it and put it out yet, but Gilbert is actually in. His father owned a shipping company, British Bradley Overseas, and him and his sisters thought nothing about getting on a ship to go to New Zealand. And this again is in the 1930s. Where's Goo gone? Oh, she's gone to New Zealand because the name of the ship is going to New Zealand to pick up orange juice or to deliver orange juice. So we get an awful lot of facts and an awful lot of history about the rest of his life. So we get Gilbert's life story through the eyes of the people who wrote the letters to him. Then, of course, we had a big reveal. We had one letter, and I'll read you a section from it in a moment. We had one letter in which your ever-loving G actually admits to being Gordon, and he's actually put that in the letter. And he's asking a rhetorical question to Gilbert: would you still love Gordon as much as you do now if so-and-so hadn't happened? And the funny thing is, the letters were being transcribed by a young lady who joined the museum, and they were being transcribed by Charlotte, and it became like a competition. I was reading the letters at home because they arrived at my home address because I bought them, and then I was giving them to her, and she was picking up things that I hadn't picked up, and it was almost like a competition. And in the end, if I bought a bundle of 6 letters, I only read 3 of them, and I gave 3 of them to Charlotte to read, and we compared notes afterwards. But we both came to the realisation that your ever-loving G was Gordon at the same time. We were stunned because we were wrong in what we'd assumed, because I'd got to retype this because I couldn't put it out anymore. But the interesting thing is we wanted to know more. You've got to remember, we've set up a museum, and if anybody had come to us when we set the museum up and said, are you going to put a cabinet for LGBT interests? We would have gone, you must be joking, we're setting up a museum. It wouldn't have crossed our mind to do that. It's something that we're now obviously looking at because of what's happened. So it made us rethink how we approach some of our displays and how we approached the letters that we'd bought. But the interesting thing from our point of view, from the museum's point of view, we wanted to know more. We wanted to know what happened. We wanted to know what happened to the story. And I actually paid for express postage on some of the letters because we wanted the next letters to come in so that we could have a look at them. In the very, very beginning, Gilbert appears to have been set up with Gordon by his cousin. And we've got a letter which is undated, it's from Salcombe, and it's from a place called Poste Restante, which I believe is a houseboat that used to be moored off the Devon coast. And it says, Dear Tim, we think, by the way, that Tim came from the fact that when Gilbert was very young, he used to read avidly the Tiger Tim comics, and also because of his connection to Brigadier General R.G. Burton, who was a tiger hunter. It says, thank you for your letter. I'm awfully glad you'll be able to come down. Looking forward much to seeing you. This is not my houseboat. Gordon has hired it for a couple of months and asked me down to stay with him. And then he puts it, it's interesting that sometimes they write letters, and in the letters then they'll cross a word out, as though they don't want the word to be there, but that's what they mean. And it actually says, the bitch, crossed out, woman who runs it and owns it is a friend of Gordon's. I think you may enjoy yourself quite a lot. You always wanted to know Gordon, and now is your opportunity. I have no doubt you will fall headlong for him, but doubt if you will confess it even to me. If you do not, you will be remarkable, as everyone does, both male and female, and he can be most charming and has the sort of figure that you will appreciate. There's a little bit more. Then he says, nothing has happened to me beyond the fact that I'm most bored with life than I can say. In consequence, I'm looking forward to seeing you, particularly if your affection is not dumb, but a trifle and a demonstration, and knowing full well that she has after meeting Gordon, which confused us a little bit, but he's obviously written something there that has a different meaning. But after you have met Gordon, I shall be a back number. Bitter? Well, yes. But I'm usually and unfortunately right. However, I get a second-hand pleasure out of seeing my friends enjoy themselves, and I'm quite certain that you will both have a really good time. So this is Gilbert's cousin, who's in a relationship with Gordon, who realises that Gilbert and Gordon will get on well together and invites Gilbert down. I can just imagine when I was growing up, inviting a friend of mine that I knew fancied my girlfriend because I knew they'd get off together. I mean, you don't do things like that. It was, but that's how they met. So it would appear Gilbert was set up, and it worked out, and Gilbert and Gordon fell absolutely madly in love. I've got a letter from August 1940. There's a couple of interesting points in this, and this is when Gordon was starting to write to Gilbert when he was in the army. He starts the letter, "My very own darling. It was wonderful of you to send that telegram. I was thrilled with it and will always keep it." We're hoping that he did, because we've only got the one side of the letters at the moment. We've got Gordon to Gilbert, but if Gordon kept all of Gilbert's letters, they're somewhere in America. And if we can get hold of those, then that will be brilliant. Needless to say, I've shown it to several people. So it wasn't a case of that they were keeping all their letters secret. Gordon has had a telegram from Gilbert, and he's shown it to several people. He says, "The other blokes in my tent thought it must be my birthday, and I had some difficulty in explaining it away." Well, then why show it to people? Again, there could be more in this that we're not reading. And then he says, "I get panic-stricken when I think of the prospect of going back to civil life and still be unable to have you with me. It is useless trying to put my feelings about it into words, but I expect you understand." And the letters that we've got are absolutely full of phrases like that.
Sorry, can I just ask, what's the date of the first letter and the second letter?
This letter is August the 5th, 1940.
1940, and
The first letter when they were set up is 1938.
Okay, 38 to 40.
Yeah, we know that afterwards because he refers in here in a minute to being 2 years ago when they first met. But the first letter isn't dated, but we've worked out it's 1938 from following it back. Then he starts to tell Gilbert about some of the things that he's done. "I had quite an amusing evening yesterday. First of all, I went as usual to the Grand," and this is in London, "and made use of the phone there." So he goes to the Grand to make his phone calls. "Then I had half a pint of beer and went on to the Radnor." And these are all places that we have on our list that we need to research and we need to do a little bit more about. "Where I had a drink with a funny, queer old man who sings a lot for the BBC. His name is George Armitage. He has been chasing me for weeks." I mean, this is not the sort of thing that you write to somebody that you're in love with that's away, is it? "Don't worry about me, by the way, I'm being chased by everybody." You know, don't you think you would be writing saying, "Actually, I sit in at night, I don't do anything, don't worry." But he doesn't. And he says, "To hark back to the Radnor, Bob turned up and various other people, all queer." The one thing we found with Gordon is that gay people that were acceptable to him are called queer. Gay people who are not acceptable to him are called pansies. It's almost like this code between them where if you're an acceptable gay person, then you're queer. If you're not, you're a pansy. And Gordon uses that phrase quite a bit. It being Sunday evening, and that seems to be the time for them all to foregather there, I got talking to various other people and somehow was introduced to Barry Sinclair, who is Ivan Novello's understudy. He's quite amusing and was apparently at one of those parties at Michael Redmond's. I believe Michael Redmond is an actor, and I believe Michael Redmond's still alive. So I've got to be a little bit careful about some of the names because we're not sure whether people are, to use the phrase that was talked about last night, out or not, or were gay at the time and aren't anymore. So we have to be a little bit careful. Although we did not meet him officially, he remembered you and thinks you are the most wonderful person he's ever seen. So Michael Redmond thinks Gilbert is one of the most wonderful people he's ever seen, with which I entirely agreed. I'd been asked to go and meet Novello in his drinking room after the show. I wasn't aware that actors had drinking rooms. I didn't think that was allowed anymore. But the letters, the interesting thing with the letters from our point of view is that they don't appear to be suppressed. They don't appear to be full of depressing, "Oh dear, I'm gay and I can't talk about it. I can only talk to you in the letter." They actually are full of the life and soul of the party, of what they did and who they met and who they went out to. And that to us is I think, what was the most interesting part, because what we've learned afterwards, part of the reason from being here, is that most gay stories from that era tend to be sad ones that ended in prosecution or ended in death or ended in suicide. And here we've got two guys that actually went through it without that happening to them, and their letters are full of all the things they enjoyed at life. And they hint at the sort of circles they move in. This is a letter that Gordon wrote to Gilbert on January the 15th, 1941. So this is almost a year later. And he writes, he has the same frustrations as everybody else. He writes, "Oh hell, I started this letter in peace and quiet, but now the store's been full of yobs making the very devil of a noise and I can't think." So he's trying to write a love letter, and the barracks has suddenly become very busy. And then he goes on about a chap called Desmond, and I think this is quite interesting, because he says, "Desmond, by the way, has been making confessions to me about himself, and it turns out that he was a very naughty boy at school and is still inwardly queer." So I'm presuming the naughty boy at school means that there were gay connotations. He's still inwardly queer, although he is terribly ashamed about it and thinks that all such people should be shot. He hopes he will outgrow it in time and become a normal married man. And I had to think about this last night when we had the presentations last night about the normal married man syndrome, of which I am one. But in the connotation that he's doing, he hopes to outgrow his gayness. And I think that emphasises the point that was made last night about if you're a boy, you're a boy. If you're a girl, you're a girl. But the problems come when you're a boy that knows you should really be a girl. And I think this is the same for somebody that possibly in those times that was gay, and the pressure was on that perhaps he shouldn't be gay. So he's hoping to outgrow it and become a normal married man. I've given him my advice and told him that I cannot understand people being queer. Actually, he's been trying to persuade me to admit my queerness, but I'm certainly not going to run the risk of the jock incident all over again. We don't know what the jock incident was. But it's that, I think, emphasises how careful he had to be. That he couldn't just talk to people and that, "Yes, I'm gay," even when that person was admitting to him that they were gay, because you just didn't know where it was going to lead. And then Gordon puts an interesting thing about the company sergeant major. You've got to remember, Gordon has gone in. Gordon and Gilbert are from quite wealthy families, so they would be quite well looked after in the army. Although Gilbert didn't want to be in the army, and his parents had we believe, a consultant who was known as Mr. Eric, who was advising them on how Gilbert could get out of the army on medical grounds, even to the extent that he tried to fake epilepsy. He didn't succeed because they promoted him and sent him north to guard the Forth Road Bridge. But Gordon writes, "In fact, the CSM, the company sergeant major, wants me to get my few shards of furniture from Chippenham and to furnish the store and a bedroom. He is prepared to send an army lorry to fetch it, and since it would save me paying for storage, I'm seriously thinking of accepting the offer." So this is somebody in wartime who's in the army, where the company sergeant major's got to send an army lorry to fetch him his personal furniture. It really is, a whole different life. And then he says, "But this evening I'm breaking out and taking Goo and Buddy to the pantomime ball at the town hall," which may be quite amusing. John Gielgud is in the revival of Dear Brutus. So we get an awful lot of the social scene that's going on as well. And of course, Goo and Buddy are Gilbert's two sisters. So Gordon was very well received by the family. And then this is all in this same letter, he then says, "Darling, I feel sometimes that I shall burst. I'm so full of pent-up love for you, which I have to keep bottled up inside me for such long and lonely periods. There, I've tried to tell you, and I find I've left out nearly everything I wanted to say and expressed the remainder very badly. Was it not a year ago today that you joined the army?" So we know roughly when Gilbert joined the army. He said, "Well, darling, we have got through 1 year of separation, and in many ways the gods have been very kind to us. We've had some of the golden moments of our lives during that year. London in March, weekends at the Boot and at Cheltenham." Cheltenham is where Gilbert lived, in a big house called Park Grange, which is now a nursing home. "And all the other wonderful, if brief, times which we have spent in each other's arms." Now, I now know how dangerous it was for Gordon to write that. Because if that letter had ever been found, and the fact that 70, 80 years later we've actually got those letters is why this collection of letters is so important.
Can I just ask you about military censorship? Who's writing all this stuff?
Yeah, this is without censorship. Yeah, this is with.
Does it go through a censor before it's received or sent?
No, because he wasn't abroad.
Oh,
You see, Gilbert was doing basic training in this country.
oh right.
So it doesn't have to go through any of the censors, which is probably why they've been a little bit more open about what they're writing. He says, "This war business cannot last many years, maybe only months, and afterwards we shall be able to live in the most wonderful heavenly happiness that has ever been known." we will be in the clean, fresh country, away from all those dreadful, dirty people with whom we are now forced to lead our lives. I presume he's talking about the other soldiers, and they were talking about going to America. Darling, it's going to be simply wonderful, and we're going to be the two happiest people in the whole world. Again, darling, I love you forever and ever, your own G. But as we now know, it wouldn't have taken an awful lot of investigation for the people at the time to find that your ever loving G was Gordon. In February 1941, this is a month after Gordon has written that letter, Gilbert must have written to Gordon. We can only surmise what Gilbert wrote to Gordon because we haven't got his letters, we've only got Gordon's replies. And Gilbert must have written to Gordon about two affairs that he'd had in Scotland. Gilbert fell in love with two men. Gordon's reply seems to be, when you cut through all the rhetoric that he's put in his letter, Gordon's reply seems to be, well, I can understand why they fell in love with you, because I did. And again, I'm trying to equate that with something that I can imagine if I wrote to a girlfriend and said, oh, by the way, last weekend I slept with two other girls. I cannot see her writing back to me and saying, oh, that's all right. That's why I do it, because you can't see that. It doesn't seem to be. But Gordon seems to be very even-handed about it and say, well, yeah, I understand you're an adorable guy. And he starts the letter back with, my darling boy, your letter is the most wonderful one that I have ever read. Wonderful in every way, but particularly wonderful because it is frank. The first time I read it, I shivered. And he says, you say a lot in it, darling, but as far as I can see, the lines are a very long way apart. And I am consequently left in doubt to a certain extent. Apart from anything else that happened at Oban, you tell me to all intents and purposes, and this is interesting how he phrases this, you slept with two different people, one of whom was quite madly in love with you, and the other was in love with someone else. But you each derived comfort from the other, but at the same time remained faithful. That doesn't equate in how I try to interpret that letter at all. What you do not say, darling, is whether the faithfulness was mental and physical, or merely mental only. And this is Gilbert trying to equate, I think, with the fact that Gordon trying to equate with the fact that Gilbert has slept with two other people. He says, you are depressed at the thought that James, this is one of the men that Gilbert slept with, might commit suicide on your behalf. And his going away has made you unhappy. Why? Well, it is because you have an affection for him, and what is more, an affection which only took a few days to spring up. So there's Gordon saying to him, don't worry about it, it's natural for you to feel like that because you have an affection for him. Regard me as someone I really am, someone you have saved from fate worse than death, but who has in the very crowded years of his life suffered most intensely, until that summer afternoon in 1938, so that's how we know it was a summer afternoon in 1938 when they met on the houseboat, when suddenly all the dark clouds of life were lifted and the sun began to shine through. Then followed months of perfect happiness. So this is the letter that Gordon is replying to Gilbert, where Gilbert's admitted sleeping with two other people. Until I met you, darling, I'd never had any real faith in anyone. Well, would you still have faith with somebody that had written you a letter telling you he'd slept with two other people? And what is more, I have never remained faithful to anyone for any length of time. So from that we gather that Gordon used to be a bit of a lad. And then, this is very strange, there are only, I think, 2.5 years between them. But Gordon constantly refers to himself as being the older man. I'm getting old and you're not. There's 3 years between them maximum. And he says, I am getting older and maybe before the war is over, I shall become more and more unattractive with the years. But you, by that time, will be hardly older than you are now. Well, they'll both be the same. And will still be wildly attractive to a certain type. In fact, I believe that you get younger rather than older, and that is largely because you do not worry about anything. And this is the letter that he's writing back in reply to the fact that Gilbert slept with two other men. And until very recently did not suffer to any great extent from depression caused by loneliness or desire for other people. Picture the time, darling, and ask yourself the question, would I under those circumstances, and this is where the big reveal came in, picture that time, darling, and ask yourself the question, would I, under those circumstances, love Gordon in the same way and so intensely as I have done during these past wonderful months? And that, again, when you think of the danger of admitting being in each other's arms, this is actually where he names himself. And he says, would you still love me exactly the same way? Would I want to or be able to remain absolutely faithful to him, mentally and physically? And he goes on about being mentally and physically faithful, and the fact that there's a difference between the two. That you can be physically unfaithful, but if you're being mentally faithful, then it's not as bad as being mentally unfaithful as well. Be able to be absolutely faithful to him mentally and physically, and still be happy and expect nothing more of life than to live blissfully and peacefully together always. So they're still talking about living together always. On the other hand, darling, from your point of view, would it not be better to live on from now on the memory of our life together when it was its most golden pitch? So it's almost like an ultimatum, are we going to carry on or are we not? To me, our love is so great that I feel it cannot exist without all the world being aware of it. And that's quite an open expression to make. He finishes the letter by saying, there is a tremendous amount of chaff in this letter, darling, but there's also a considerable quality of grain, if only you can find it. And then he says, darling, I need you as I have never needed anything in my life before, and I love you, yes, more than ever before. Our love, darling, is something sacred and must be kept forever clean and as wonderful as it always has been. And I think I've picked out a few phrases there, but if you read the whole letter actually leads up to that point. And the other interesting thing in the same letter, and this is, we've got the impression that Gordon's mum was aware that he was gay and more or less accepted it, and Gilbert's mum, we think, accepted it, but the hint was that Dad must never find out. For goodness sake, don't let Dad find out. We think that Gordon's two sisters realised. We're pretty sure his brother knew. But Dad must never find out. And Gordon actually writes, since Saturday when I began this letter, my mood has changed again and I feel full of faith and confidence. So that's after he's reread the letter and he's writing back. I suppose I should not send the first part of this letter, but I'm going to because I know you hate me to begin a letter and after reading it over destroy it. So he's not sending it because he wants to, he's sending it because he knows that Gilbert would expect him to. And in any case, it will perhaps show you what my feelings are at times, which is a good point. In other words, that's how I felt when I first read your letter, and now I've calmed down a bit. I think I put my foot in things again yesterday at PG, which is Park Grange, Cheltenham, where Gilbert lived, because your mother's first words were, have you heard from Tim? And I replied that I had, assuming that she had also heard. Excuse me. However, I learnt one thing, and that is that she is now fully aware of how we love each other and does not disapprove. Late in the evening, when Buddy's airman was there, we were talking about what we were going to do when the war is over, and I said, I think I shall go to California, or somewhere miles away from the desolation of post-war Britain. Whereupon your mother said, well, you must give Tim time to come and take me to Scotland before you do that.
Wow.
So his mother had accepted and assumed that her son, Tim, we know as Gilbert, was going to go with Gordon to California. He didn't, and I think that proves that your mother is fully aware that we intend living together after the war. And I think that's a massive revelation in 1941. And listening to your point yesterday, where his partner, or his soon-to-be partner, has already received sort of tacit acceptance from Gilbert's mother. And I think that again is a big important point in the letters. The letters unfortunately stopped towards the end of the war. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm supposed to be...
You have to finish off.
Right, I've got to finish up quickly. Right.
We're going to hear the end, are there?
Right. Brief summary of their lives afterwards. Gilbert produced a book called The Blue and White Pottery of Derbyshire. He died in Brighton. He was once picked up by Sir Paul Latham, Conservative MP, in the Ritz beneath the Ritz, which was known as the Pink Lounge. And Gilbert was picked up there once by Sir Paul Latham, and then Sir Paul Latham was accused in 1941 of indecency and tried to commit suicide by riding an army motorcycle into a tree, at which point his wooden leg jammed on the controls, so he couldn't ride the bike anyway. Gilbert was interviewed, and I think this is absolutely hilarious. Gilbert was interviewed and said, It was reported in the Times that Sir Paul had an artificial leg, and although he'd ridden this particular motorcycle before, he'd have difficulty in controlling it. And Gilbert was interviewed and said, "I was surprised to read about the false leg. I'm not sure I failed to notice it." which is absolutely brilliant. Gordon went to America. He did go to California. He set up a racing stable. I've got 2 of the Grand National programs here from 53 and 56. He had horses that ran on National Day, not in the National, but in the National program. And when he went to California, he set up a stable, and one of his grooms by the name of Sirhan Sirhan, 4 years after he worked for Gordon, assassinated Sir Bobby Kennedy, the senator. Senator Bobby Kennedy, sorry. So Gordon, intrigue, followed them all the way through. Well, in the museum, we wanted to know more. We wanted to know more about a subject that is not on normal museums' radar, and perhaps should be. Perhaps every museum should look at in their area. It's something that certainly wasn't on my radar. But what about me, personally? I bought the letters, and I've been involved in putting the story together. So what effect has it had on me personally? Well, I'm going to borrow a quote from the Titanic. And when Jack is sitting down eating lunch, Jack turns around to him and says, "Well, yesterday I was doing so-and-so." Well, 2 weeks ago I was sitting in a museum transcribing letters and writing bits and pieces. And here I am today talking to you good fine people. That's point number 1. It's quite appropriate to use a Titanic quote because it rivals the Titanic as a love story. The letters, the story that we've uncovered, have the power to make people want to know more, because it made me want to know more. 12 months ago, if you'd have said to any of my children, my daughter's going to laugh at this, if you'd have said to any of my children, "Your dad is going to be doing a presentation at the Rainbow Festival in Shrewsbury," I would have laughed. And if you'd have said it in front of my children, they would have laughed louder. So that's the power that these letters have. And I think, rather than me finishing, I can't even begin to tell you the interest since I pulled into that lay-by and rang Radio Shropshire after hearing Peter on the radio, and where this has all come from. Radio Shropshire have been in touch. BBC Midlands Today have filmed. We've had 2 offers in the last 48 hours from TV companies that want to make either a documentary or a drama series out of the letters. Right. I've had 2 editors from London contact me who want to help us with the book that we said we were going to write. I've had academics from other universities contact me, and hot off the press this morning I had an email from somebody that said, "I live abroad, do you plan to digitise the letters so that I can read them online?" I would love to read them online. So I think I need to leave the last word to Gordon. I think Gordon should have the last word in my talk here. In the letter in 1941, Gordon wrote to Gilbert and he said, "Darling, I love you. How silly and inadequate that sounds, and how insufficiently it describes my feelings. But you know how impossible I find it to convey the full extent of my adoration for you. I have been reading over a lot of your letters." So he kept them. I hope he still had them when he went to America. "And I feel that they should all be published one day when the world becomes wiser and more broad-minded." Gordon, we're getting there. The world is becoming wiser and more broad-minded. The time to publish you and Gilbert's story is now. What do you think about that, Gordon? Thank you.